They saw the scar and thought nothing of it. A distinctive burn mark running down an elderly man's forearm at the neighborhood coffee shop. Surely just an old accident, but they didn't know what it meant or where it came from. Not yet. They thought he was just another retired grandfather, just a man with white hair and warm coffee, until a visiting firefighter caught a glimpse of his arm and stood at attention. The morning light filtered through the windows of the Daily Grind in Portland, Oregon. A typical neighborhood coffee shop where regulars gathered for morning routines and strangers passed through for caffeine. Rows of tables hosted laptop workers and retirees reading newspapers. Customers chatted, ordered, enjoyed the communal space. And behind the counter, preparing drinks with practiced efficiency, was a man in his late 60s with weathered hands and a distinctive scar visible when his sleeves rolled up. And Thomas Kane, 68, coffee shop owner. The kind of friendly proprietor that customers trusted but knew little about personally. His shop was immaculate but unpretentious, his coffee excellent but reasonably priced, his manner warm but professionally distant. He carried no visible signs of his past beyond the burn scar that ran from wrist to elbow on his left arm. He owned a business nowhere near fire stations. His old Chevy truck had a coffee shop logo and a support local business bumper sticker. And aside from one detail, a distinctive phoenix-shaped burn scar that most assumed was from a kitchen accident, he was completely unremarkable. Old Tom's scar is pretty gnarly, one of the younger baristas mentioned during morning prep. Must have been a serious burn, probably knocked over a pot of coffee or something back in the day. Casual curiosity followed, but no real interest. Thomas ignored it, as he ignored most speculation about his appearance. He moved through the daily grind like a dedicated professional. Well-loved by the regular customers who appreciated his consistency, invisible to the corporate coffee chains that dominated Portland, and considered gentle but distant by his employees who knew his coffee preferences but nothing about his background. He had been running the daily grind for 12 years. Same schedule every week, 5 a.m. opening, morning rush until 10 a.m., lunch service, close at 6 p.m. The regulars knew his espresso was exceptional, perfectly pulled shots, microfoam artistry, temperature control that suggested decades of practice with heat and precision. The staff knew he never raised his voice, even during chaotic rushes, and maintained impossibly high standards. But none of them knew where he'd learned to work under pressure, and not one suspected what the phoenix-shaped scar actually represented. That was exactly how Thomas wanted it. Professional, calm, safe and until Wednesday morning, dotto. It was supposed to be just another busy weekday morning, serving commuters and students. The shop was in its typical pre-work rush, filled with orders being called out and milk being steamed. Thomas was pulling espresso shots when a young man in a Portland fire and rescue jacket approached the counter. The firefighter, barely 30 with the clean-cut appearance of someone early in their career, ordered a black coffee and turned to leave. Then he froze, his eyes locked on Thomas's exposed forearm as the older man reached for a cup. "Sir," the firefighter said, his voice suddenly formal. "Excuse me, sir." Thomas looked up from the espresso machine, noting the young man's rigid posture. "Your coffee's coming right up. That scar on your arm." The firefighter stepped closer, other customers beginning to notice the interaction. "And that's not a regular burn scar." Thomas felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came whenever someone looked too closely at what he'd tried to hide in plain sight for 12 years. Old kitchen accident, hazard of the coffee business. The firefighter's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching reverence. "With respect, sir, I've seen kitchen burns. That pattern, that's from a backdraft. The way the skin scarred in that phoenix shape, that's from superheated gases igniting. I've only seen that kind of burn on firefighters who've survived flashovers, and the coffee shop's ambient noise. Conversations, milk steaming, music playing seemed to fade into background static. Several customers had paused their morning routines to watch the exchange. Like I said, old accident," Thomas repeated, focusing on the espresso shot with the intense concentration that had once helped him stay calm in burning buildings. The young firefighter pulled out his phone, quickly searching something. "The Phoenix pattern. I've heard about this. There was a legendary fire chief in Portland, before my time. Chief Thomas Kane. He saved an entire apartment building during the Morrison Street fire in 2003. The building collapsed while he was inside, and he got this exact burn pattern from the backdraft that threw him clear. Thomas's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he finished the espresso shot. Other customers were now openly listening, phones being raised to capture whatever was unfolding. Chief Kane disappeared after he retired. The firefighter continued, his voice carrying the reverence of someone discussing a departmental legend. The guys at Station 12 still tell stories. The Morrison Street miracle. 15 families saved. They say the chief went back in 3 times after other firefighters pulled out. No one could survive what he survived. An elderly regular named Margaret spoke up from her corner table. "Tom, is this true? You are a fire chief?" Thomas set down the portafilter with careful precision. Decades of command experience warring with 12 years of carefully maintained anonymity. "That was a long time ago. Different life. Your coffee's ready, young man." But the firefighter didn't take his coffee. Instead, he straightened into a formal position of attention. "Chief Kane, I'm firefighter Ryan Chen, Station 7. It's an honor, sir. An absolute honor. You're a legend in the department." The coffee shop had gone completely silent. Thomas could feel every eye on him, every phone probably recording, every carefully constructed wall of his retired civilian life crumbling under the weight of recognition he'd spent over a decade avoiding. "At ease, firefighter," Thomas said quietly, years of command authority bleeding through his coffee shop owner persona. "That was a different life. I'm just a retired man who makes coffee now." "But why?" Chen asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "You're Chief Thomas Kane. You could have any role in fire services. Training, consulting, speaking. Why hide in a coffee shop?" Thomas looked down at the phoenix scar, the mark that had betrayed him. The pattern was distinctive, not random burns, but the precise shape created when superheated gases ignite in a specific pattern during a backdraft. Anyone with real fire experience would recognize it. He'd just been lucky for 12 years that no one who understood what they were seeing had noticed. "Because I gave enough," Thomas said finally. 35 years. Hundreds of fires. Too many close calls. After Morrison Street, I had nothing left to give except what I could offer here. Good coffee and a calm space. Margaret stood from her table. "Tom, in 12 years you never mentioned you were a hero." "I'm not a hero," Thomas replied firmly. "I did my job. When the job was done, I retired. That's all." But Chen wasn't finished. "Chief, the Morrison Street fire. Everyone said it was impossible. The building was fully engulfed. Command had ordered evacuation. But you heard someone inside. A child. You went back in alone." Thomas's jaw tightened with memories he'd tried to bury under 12 years of espresso shots and comfortable routine. 3 people were in that building when it should have been empty. A mother and 2 children who'd been missed in the initial evacuation. Someone had to go get them. "The building collapsed 30 seconds after you got them out," Chen said. "The backdraft that gave you that scar, it threw you 20 feet through a window. You broke 4 ribs and punctured a lung. They said you shouldn't have survived, let alone carried 3 people to safety." "The building gave me an exit," Thomas said quietly. "The explosion threw me clear. I was lucky. You were legendary," Chen corrected. "And now you make coffee?" Thomas looked around his shop. The warm lighting, the comfortable chairs, the regulars who'd become friends without knowing his past. "Now I make coffee," he confirmed. "It's honest work. It helps people start their day. Nobody gets hurt." "That's enough." As Chen finally took his coffee and left, promising to inform the department about the chief's whereabouts, Thomas knew his carefully maintained anonymity was finished. The Phoenix scar had betrayed him, and by afternoon, the entire Portland Fire Department would know that their legendary chief was pouring lattes in a neighborhood coffee shop. But as Thomas returned to the espresso machine and pulled the next shot, he found himself wondering if hiding had been the right choice, or if recognition might bring a different kind of peace. The acknowledgement that service takes many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing a hero can do is choose to be ordinary. By afternoon, the daily grind had become an impromptu memorial to Thomas's hidden past. Off-duty firefighters began arriving, not to confront, but to pay respects. They ordered coffee and left generous tips, many simply wanting to shake the hand of a chief they'd heard about in department folklore. Thomas served them all with the same professional courtesy he showed every customer, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to deny the genuine respect being offered. Captain Maria Santos from Station 12 arrived around 3 p.m. She was in her 50s, clearly senior enough to have overlapped with Thomas's career. "Chief Kane," she said formally, "we wondered what happened to you." Thomas gestured her to a quiet corner table, bringing 2 coffees. "I retired, opened a coffee shop. That's what happened." Maria studied the Phoenix scar, now the most discussed feature in Portland's fire service social media. "The Morrison Street fire was my 3rd year on the job. I was on the engine company that responded. I watched you go back in when everyone else said it was suicide." "It was the job," Thomas said simply. "It was beyond the job," Maria corrected. "You knew that building was coming down. You went anyway because a mother was screaming that her babies were inside. The department wanted to give you a medal. You refused and retired 6 months later. Why?" Thomas was silent for a long moment, stirring his coffee with the precise movements that had once guided hose teams through smoke-filled buildings. "Because I'd used up all my luck. Every firefighter has a finite amount, you know that. After Morrison Street, I'd spent mine. It was time to stop before my luck ran out, and I took someone else down with me. So you opened a coffee shop. I wanted to contribute something that didn't involve risking lives, mine or anyone else's. Coffee is simple, predictable." Safe Maria leaned back, studying him with the assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people under pressure. "Chief, you trained half the officers currently serving in Portland. Your tactics for ventilation and interior attack are still taught at the academy. You don't just disappear from that legacy." "I didn't disappear. I transitioned. There's a difference." "To what? Making lattes for people who don't know they're being served by a legend?" Thomas met her eyes directly. "To making good coffee for people who need a calm moment in their day. It's not dramatic, but it matters." After Maria left, promising to keep his location confidential within the department, but unable to prevent what was already spreading on social media, Thomas found himself facing a decision. He could close the shop, move somewhere else, start over with a new identity. Or he could accept that his past had caught up with him and figure out how to integrate rather than hide. Margaret, his longtime customer, approached the counter during a rare, quiet moment. "Tom, Chief Kane. However, I should address you now. I've been coming here for 10 years. You've made my coffee the same way every single morning. You ask about my grandkids. You remember everyone's preferences. That's not hiding. That's serving your community in a different way." "It's just coffee," Thomas protested. "It's consistency, safety, reliability. After my husband died, this shop was the first place I went every morning because I knew you'd be here, and everything would be exactly as expected. That's not less valuable than firefighting. It's different, valuable." That evening, after closing, Thomas sat alone in his shop, staring at the Phoenix scar that had exposed him. The mark had been with him for 19 years, a permanent reminder of the Morrison Street fire and the moment when luck and skill had barely been enough. He could remove the evidence, wear long sleeves always, hide the scar that connected his past to his present. But Margaret's words lingered. Different, valuable. Maybe Chief Thomas Kane and Tom, the coffee shop owner, weren't separate identities, but different expressions of the same mission, providing safety, consistency, and service to people who needed it. The next morning, Thomas opened the daily grind to find a line of customers that stretched around the block. Word had spread not just through fire service, but through neighborhood social media. People wanted coffee from the legendary chief, wanted to see the Phoenix scar, wanted to hear stories of heroism. Thomas handled it the only way he knew how, by making excellent coffee with the same precise attention to detail that had once made him an exceptional fire chief. No speeches, no war stories, just consistent service delivered with quiet competence. Firefighter Chen returned, this time with several colleagues. "Chief, we were hoping, would you consider coming to the station just to talk to the probationary firefighters? Your tactics, your approach to leadership, it would mean everything." Thomas paused in pulling an espresso shot, considering the request that would officially end his anonymous retirement. "I left that world for good reasons. We know, but you could share those reasons too." Help young firefighters understand that there's no shame in recognizing your limits, in choosing when to transition. The department needs that wisdom as much as it needs tactical training. Thomas looked at the Phoenix Scar, then at the line of customers waiting patiently for their morning coffee. "And I'll think about it." But as the day progressed and customer after customer thanked him not just for coffee but for years of service they'd only just learned about, Thomas began to understand that hiding his past hadn't honored it. It had diminished it. Chief Thomas Kane had spent 35 years running into danger to save lives. Tom, the coffee shop owner, had spent 12 years creating a safe space for community connection. Both missions mattered. Both served. The Phoenix Scar connected them, a permanent reminder that some people rise from fire not to become famous, but to become useful in whatever way their community needs. That evening, Thomas called Captain Santos. "About that academy training session, I'll do it. On one condition. After I talk about tactics in Morrison Street, I also talk about knowing when to transition. About finding new ways to serve when the old ways are finished. Deal?" Maria said immediately. As Thomas closed the daily grind that night, he realized the Phoenix Scar had given him something unexpected. Not exposure or unwanted attention, but permission to integrate all the parts of himself. The chief who'd saved lives, and the coffee shop owner who served community in quieter ways. Some scars mark endings. Thomas Kane's Phoenix Scar marked transformation, from fighting fires to brewing coffee, from leading emergency operations to creating daily rituals of calm and consistency. The mission hadn't ended when he retired. It had simply changed tools, from hoses and axes to espresso machines and warm conversations. Both versions of service mattered. Both deserved recognition. And perhaps most importantly, both could coexist. The legendary chief and the neighborhood coffee shop owner, connected by a scar that proved you could rise from the ashes into something different but equally valuable. If this story moved you, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden heroes walking among us. What does service mean to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments.